shows Denitra Vance as Susan Rice, John Belushi as Ron Klain, and Phil Hartman as President Joe Biden, sitting in an oval-shaped office watching TV. On the TV shows footage of Hartman giving a speech the day before, pointing to someone in the crowd and saying, "Now, hey, you there. Now, here's the deal. You have to come say hi to me later. No, the fact is, we go back a long way. I mean, look, she was 12 and I was 30. The point is, she helped me get a lot done, if you know what I mean." Cuts back to the Oval Office. Vance: "Joe, you cannot reminisce about fucking 12-year-olds on camera." Belushi: "What Susan means, Mr. President, is that mentioning age in that manner can be taken advantage of by the Republicans to place you in a bad light." Hartman: "Nonsense, Tony Baloney." Belushi: "My name's Ron." Biden: "Of course it is. I mean, the fact is, look, her parents were completely okay with it, okay? They gave me the go-ahead." Vance: "Sweet Jesus!" Belushi: "Now, when you say that, you mean the girl and her parents helped you fix the school system in the area, right?" Hartman: "Well, of course that's what I meant, Tony Pony." Belushi: "Again, it's not Tony, Mr. President. It's Ron. Ron Klain." Hartman: Okay, Don, Ron, whatever you say. But here's the deal. And this is for you too, Susie. Okay, I love meeting young girls when I'm out among people." Belushi: "It's just that." Hartman interrupts, looks at Vance and says, "I once had a very nice friend named Susie. She was 13. I was 46. Her babysitter had put flowers in her hair and bells in her shoes. I knew without asking that she watched Blue's Clues." Vance: "Lord have mercy." Belushi: "I'm sorry, Mr. President, was that a Grateful Dead reference with a Blue's Clues mention?" Hartman: "So what if it was? Okay, here, the fact is that I love the Grateful Dead, okay? I first saw those guys in '74 with a nice young friend of mine. She was 11, I was 32. Man, what a time to be alive it was. The drug-fueled '70s. So many great young people, estranged from their parents. It was wonderful." Vance: "Ron, why don't you tell him about our proposal before we become accomplices to his next Roman Polanski story?" Belushi: "Well, Mr. President, we know that you just happen to be so innocent that you don't always appreciate the negative connotations that can be drawn from things you say." Hartman: "Well, come on, man. Now, speaking of drawing, you remember that Titanic movie? The one where Jack threw Rose? The fact is, I actually met the real Rose. Now, this was before the Titanic. She was 10 and I was 21. Belushi: "Anyway, Mr. President, we'd like you to have a live moving teleprompter with you while you're out speaking, so you don't inadvertently give people the wrong idea." Hartman: "Well, here's the deal about that, Tony Jabroni. If grown men having suspiciously intimate relationships with preteen girls is wrong, then I don't want to be right." Vance: "Okay, I'm this close to leaving and going to work for Trump." Belushi: "Be that as it may, Mr. President, we really think it will help with the midterms. If you read from a teleprompter we provide you anytime you're talking off the cuff and your affinity to making interpersonal relationships with young girls comes up." Chris Farley enters the oval-shaped office with a large teleprompter hung over his shoulders, hanging out over his stomach. Belushi: "Now watch this, Mr. President. The teleprompter will tell you what to say based on my own thoughts. Let's try it out. Why don't you just say whatever's on your mind?" Hartman: "Well, what's on my mind is Mandy Sue, a 10-year-old I met when I was 50 years old." Shows Belushi put on a helmet and stare at the teleprompter. Words then appear on the teleprompter, which Biden reads. "She was a cancer patient, and I spoke with her family and we were able to get a kidney donated. from another children's hospital through ingenuity and teamwork, traits I use every day to make this country better. Not bad, Tony. But the thing is, now here, the little darling redhead with cancer I met wasn't Mandy Sue. Okay, she was my little orphan Annie. She was 9, I was 60 at the time. Here's the deal. Now, come on, man. Live from Tom's phone, we're not alive. It's Saturday Night Live SNotL, starring an ever-evolving cast that is unionized and refuses to allow their names to be mentioned until their demands are met. Musical guest, Glenn Miller, and your host, Lenny Bruce. Ladies and gentlemen, Lenny Bruce. Applause, applause, applause. Shows George Carlin, who says, I want to take a moment to say that Mr. Lenny Bruce is one of the greatest stand-up comedians of all time, and perhaps the most influential. He fell on a lot of swords for us other comedians, as he battled obscenity charges for saying words like cocksucker and schmuck. And his going through that bullshit helped shed light on how fucking pathetic and unnecessary obscenity laws are. When I first heard the album, The Sick Humor of Lenny Bruce, what it did for me was this. It let me know that there was a place to go, to reach for, in terms of honesty and self-expression. So please give it up for the legend, Lenny Bruce. Carlin leaves as Bruce comes out. Applause, applause, applause. Bruce. Thank you, thank you. You're a wonderful audience. Not very lively, but I can't blame you for that. I have a reputation of being sort of controversial and irreverent, and also the semantics bear trap of bad taste. I promise you I won't disappoint. You know, one thing I appreciate up here is you can say whatever you want finally, you know. There's no more uptight suits telling me what I can and can't say. Jager Hoover's too busy trying on new dresses to bother me up here. And that's completely cool, man. If that's what he wants to do, let him be a her. But of course, the new suits down there, even when they have a good idea like promoting people who aren't hurting anybody else, being themselves, they still got to go fuck everything up and try to control what everyone says about it. But I think it's no problem that J. Edgar Hoover dressed like a lady, if that's what he wants to do. Some other cat might still think that's not very cool for him to do that. Mainly because they aren't familiar with the idea from any personal experience. Or they also just might think it's maniacally hypocritical for someone to spend his life going after people who went against the grain, while he was hoping his brassiere didn't show through his shirt. And there might be a great point in there about the people we allow to control society, that they're small-minded, hypocritical control freaks who don't actually know what the fuck they're doing. And despite that point that should be allowed to be said, the suits aren't going to let that be said in that way, with the excuse being transsexuals might find it offensive. Plus, those suits all of a sudden become skirts once Friday night rolls around. I personally think it's cool for people to be themselves, to dress however they want, and consider themselves whatever sexual identity they want. In my heyday, there were gays, lesbians, bisexuals, queers, transsexuals, and back then they were fighting against the man. Now they seemingly become the man, until Friday night when the man becomes the woman. And besides being on the side of the powers that be in general, if you can't parody somebody or a particular group, you can't normalize them to anybody else. They'll always be estranged from middle America because they're not allowed to be treated like everybody else. You need kid gloves dealing with them. Sure, President Biden has plenty of kid gloves, by the way. But just think of some square in Omaha who's never met a transsexual, other than his girlfriend, who we thought just had a giant circumcised clitoris. This square opens the news and sees there's all this stuff going on he doesn't really know anything about personally, LGBTQ+. He knows it's a thing that's out there. He knows it's in the news, but he hasn't really lived it, experienced it, so he doesn't really know anything about it. He's read the word non-binary, but he still has a Bible on the table. He doesn't remember reading about Noah putting any non-binaries onto the ark. I mean, isn't it an oxymoron to have two non-binaries anyway? So how is a square like him supposed to know anything about that particular culture that people want normalized and want to prevent hostile reaction toward? Through entertainment. If that square is ever going to accept as normal, this thing he has no real world experience with, and he then needs to see the whole community be humanized. And every human has been the butt of a joke before, at least once, from the president down to his 13-year-old ex-girlfriend. Because if no one can ever question them, make any fun of them under any circumstances, lampoon them, or use their existence as an excuse to point out the Fed's hypocrisy, then they won't be normalized for the squares in Omaha, let alone those racist rectangles in Lincoln. But anyway, enough about the producer exploiting my rebellious nature to further his propaganda. The most important point of all is that all artistic expression should be allowed to exist. Because while preventing bigots from offending marginalized groups is a laudable goal in a vacuum, freedom of expression is so important that the necessary evil of offensive humor that spawns from that has to be allowed to exist. Because once you let the suits take away expression for being offensive, that slippery slope will eventually lead to suits prohibiting expression that questions the legitimacy of their actions. Plus, you won't be able to breathe in that fucking mask you'll be wearing again. And if you can't even have exist the expression of defiance to their decisions, you don't have any freedom. You're just a slave to the whims of people like Hoover, who'd have you terrorized for not abiding by cultural standards he himself didn't even follow. Man, I wish I could have been a little more upbeat, but you guys make the 1950s seem like a Nazi-produced snuff film in comparison. Nonetheless, we have a great show tonight. Glenn Miller is here. So I hope you're in the mood for Moonlight Serenade. We'll be right back.